The day was quiet in the suburbs, too quiet for a man like him. The Mafia boss, Dante Marino, had come to this part of town for one reason only: business that wasn't meant to be heard by anyone. But as he stepped out of his black SUV, he noticed something strange on the sunlit sidewalk. A tiny girl standing alone beneath a flickering street lamp that somehow still buzzed in the daylight. Shoes muddy, hands shaking, breathing fast, like she had been running. She looked straight at him, not at his men, not at the guns they carried, at him. Before Dante could speak, she took a step forward and whispered, "Please follow me home." His men froze. "Boss, you want us to move her?" But Dante lifted a hand, because something in her voice, the way it cracked, the quiet desperation, pulled at a part of him he thought had died long ago. He crouched down, leveling his eyes with hers. "Where are your parents? Why are you alone out here?" The girl swallowed hard, tears filling her eyes. I couldn't stay inside anymore." Then she grabbed his sleeve with both hands. "Please, I need you. Mom said, if things ever got bad, find the man with the scar." Dante's heart stopped. She pointed at the scar on his hand, the one no outsider should have known about, the one tied to a secret he buried years ago. "How do you know who I am?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. The girl wiped her nose with her sleeve. Because my mom said you'd come back for us." Dante stood instantly. "Take me to your house," he said. She nodded and tugged him toward a narrow, quiet street, one his men had never scouted, one that shouldn't have held any danger. But as they approached the small, broken home at the end of the road, Dante felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something inside was terribly wrong. And when he finally stepped through that doorway, the truth he found waiting left even the Mafia boss unable to speak. Stay with me until the end, because what Dante discovers inside that house will break your heart and explain why the little girl chose him. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her dark hair was tangled and unwashed, hanging in messy strands around her pale face. The dress she wore was once white, but now it was stained with dirt and something else Dante couldn't identify. Her bare feet were cut and bleeding from running on the rough pavement. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Dante asked gently, his voice softer than it had been in decades. "Emma," she whispered, never letting go of his sleeve. "Emma Rodriguez." The name hit Dante like a punch to the chest. Rodriguez. He knew that name. He knew it better than he wanted to remember. "Your mother," he said slowly. "What's her name?" "Isabella," Emma said, her voice growing smaller. "But she's sick, really sick. And the men came to our house last night. They were angry about money Daddy owed them before he died." Dante's jaw clenched. His men exchanged worried glances behind him, recognizing the dangerous shift in their boss's demeanor. "What men?" Dante asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They had guns like yours," Emma said, pointing at the weapons his bodyguards carried. "But they weren't nice like you. They yelled at Mommy and made her cry. They said if she didn't pay Daddy's debt by tonight, they would take me away forever." The pieces were falling into place, and Dante felt a rage building in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. Isabella Rodriguez, the woman he had loved 20 years ago. The woman he had been forced to leave behind when his father demanded he choose between family loyalty and everything else that mattered. "Emma," he said carefully, "how much money do these men want from your mother?" $50,000, she said, the number sounding impossibly large coming from such a small voice. "Mommy cried all night because we don't have that kind of money. We barely have money for food." Dante stood up, his mind racing. $50,000 was pocket change to him now, but to a single mother struggling to survive, it might as well have been 50 million. The fact that rival gang members were threatening Isabella and her daughter made his blood boil. "Take me to your house," he said again, this time with deadly certainty in his voice. Emma nodded and began walking down the cracked sidewalk. As they moved, Dante noticed how she kept looking over her shoulder. as if expecting someone to jump out from behind the overgrown hedges that lined the street. "Have you eaten today?" he asked, noticing how thin she looked. Emma shook her head. "Mommy gave me her breakfast. She said she wasn't hungry, but I know she was lying. She always lies when we don't have enough food." The walk took 15 minutes through increasingly run-down neighborhoods. Paint peeled from houses like old skin. Windows were boarded up or covered with thick curtains. This wasn't the kind of place where a woman like Isabella belonged. But Dante knew that life had a way of dragging good people into dark corners. When they finally stopped in front of a small, weathered house with a sagging front porch, Emma hesitated. "She might be sleeping," she whispered. "The medicine makes her tired." "What kind of medicine?" Dante asked, though he dreaded the answer. "The kind that helps with the pain," Emma said simply. "She has the sickness that makes you really tired and thin. She tries to hide it from me, but I know. Cancer." Dante felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart with an iron fist. Isabella was dying, alone, trying to raise a daughter while being terrorized by loan sharks over a dead husband's debt. As they approached the front door, Dante could see that the house had been vandalized recently. The word "pay" was spray-painted in red letters across the white siding. Several windows had been cracked, and the front door hung slightly askew on its hinges. "They did this last night," Emma explained, following his gaze. "After they left, Mommy just sat on the floor and cried. That's when I decided to go find the man with the scar." "How did you know where to find me?" Dante asked. "I didn't," Emma admitted. "I just walked and walked until I saw someone who looked important. Mommy always said you were important, that you could fix things other people couldn't fix." The innocence in her voice nearly broke him. This little girl had wandered dangerous streets for hours, looking for a man she'd never met, based on stories her dying mother had told her about someone from the past. Emma pushed open the broken front door, and immediately Dante was hit with the smell of sickness and poverty. The house was small and dark, with furniture that had seen better decades. But despite the obvious financial struggles, everything was clean and organized. Isabella had maintained her dignity even in the face of overwhelming hardship. "Mommy?" Emma called out softly. "I brought help." From somewhere deeper in the house came a weak voice. "Emma? Baby, where did you go? I was so worried." They found Isabella in a small bedroom at the back of the house. When Dante saw her, his breath caught in his throat. She was still beautiful, even ravaged by illness. Her dark hair was now streaked with premature gray, and her once full figure had been reduced to skin and bones. But her eyes were the same warm brown he remembered from their youth. When she saw him standing in her doorway, those eyes went wide with shock. "Dante," she whispered, struggling to sit up in bed. "Is it really you?" He stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Hello, Bella." The nickname hung in the air between them, carrying 20 years of regret and unfinished conversations. Tears began streaming down Isabella's face as she reached out a trembling hand toward him. "I never thought I'd see you again. Not after what your father made you choose." Emma climbed onto the bed beside her mother, wrapping her small arms around Isabella's frail shoulders. "Mommy, don't cry. The man with the scar is here now. He's going to help us, just like you said he would." Dante moved closer, his hardened exterior cracking with every step. "Bella, why didn't you tell me? All these years you had my daughter and never said a word?" Isabella's eyes widened in confusion. "Your daughter? Dante, what are you talking about?" He gestured toward Emma, his voice breaking. "She knew about my scar. She knew I'd come back. You told her about me." A sad smile crossed Isabella's lips as understanding dawned. "Dante, Emma isn't your daughter. She's my late husband, Miguel's child. But you're right about one thing. I did tell her about you. Every night when she couldn't sleep, I told her stories about the man who once loved me enough to change the world." The revelation hit Dante like a physical blow. For a moment, he had allowed himself to believe that this brave little girl was his own flesh and blood. But the disappointment was quickly replaced by something deeper, something more profound. "Then why?" he asked. "Why did she come looking for me?" Isabella coughed, a harsh sound that racked her entire body. When she recovered, she looked at her daughter with infinite love. Because I told her that if anything ever happened to me, if we ever needed a miracle, there was one man in this world who had the power to move mountains. One man who would never let an innocent child suffer if he could prevent it. Emma nodded solemnly. Mommy said you were the strongest man she ever knew. Not because you hurt people, but because you protected people who couldn't protect themselves. Dante felt something shift inside his chest. This woman, dying and desperate, had sent her daughter into the streets based on a 20-year-old memory of who he used to be. The faith she had placed in him was both humbling and terrifying. "The men who came here," he said, his voice hardening. "Tell me everything." Isabella's expression darkened. "They work for Carlos Vega. You remember him, don't you? He runs the East Side now." Dante's jaw clenched. Carlos Vega had been a small-time dealer when Dante knew him years ago. Apparently, he had moved up in the world and developed delusions of grandeur. Miguel owed him money? Dante asked. Miguel was sick too before he died, Isabella explained. Cancer, just like me. He borrowed money for treatments that didn't work. When he passed 6 months ago, Carlos decided the debt transferred to me. Emma spoke up, her voice steady despite her young age. "The scary men said if Mommy doesn't pay tonight, they'll sell me to bad people to make the money back." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dante felt a rage building inside him that was cold and calculated, the kind of fury that had made him legendary in his world. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. Isabella checked the cracked clock on her nightstand. "They're coming back at 8 tonight. It's almost 6 now." Dante pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. His men had positioned themselves throughout the small house, their presence both protective and intimidating. "Marco," he called to his lieutenant, "I need you to make some calls." "Yes, boss. What do you need?" "Find out everything about Carlos Vega's operation. Where he lives, where he works, who he runs with. I want a complete picture in the next hour." Dante paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And Marco, bring the car around. We're going to end this tonight." While Marco made the calls, Dante returned to Isabella's bedside. Emma had curled up next to her mother, both of them looking exhausted and afraid despite his presence. "Bella," he said gently, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me." She nodded weakly. "If I handle this situation with Carlos, if I make sure you and Emma are safe, what happens next? The doctors, the treatments, taking care of Emma when you're gone?" Isabella's composure finally cracked completely. "I don't know," she sobbed. "I've been trying so hard to figure it out, but I'm dying, Dante. The treatments aren't working anymore. I have maybe 3 months and I have no family left. No one to take care of her." Emma lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. "I can take care of myself. I'm really good at making sandwiches and I know how to use the washing machine." The bravery in her voice broke something inside Dante that he didn't know could still break. This 8-year-old girl was preparing to face the world alone, and she was trying to comfort the adults around her. "You won't have to take care of yourself," Dante said firmly. "I promise you that." Isabella grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "Dante, you don't understand what you're saying. Taking care of a child, especially after I'm gone, that's not something you can just decide in a moment of emotion." "Yes, it is," he replied without hesitation. 20 years ago, your love changed me from a monster into a man. Today, your daughter's courage reminded me who I used to be. Maybe it's time I remembered that being strong isn't just about intimidating people. Maybe it's about using that strength to protect innocence." Marco appeared in the doorway. "Boss, I've got the information you wanted. Carlos Vega operates out of a warehouse on 5th Street. He's got about 12 guys working for him, mostly small-time muscle. Word is he's been expanding too fast, making enemies." Dante stood up, his decision made. "Good. Emma, I need you to stay here with your mother. My men will watch the house. No one gets in or out without my permission." "Where are you going?" Emma asked, her eyes wide. "To have a conversation with Mr. Vega about debt forgiveness and the proper treatment of mothers and daughters." Isabella tried to sit up. Dante, please be careful. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of us. He leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. Nothing is going to happen to me, Bella. And more importantly, nothing is going to happen to either of you. Not tonight. Not ever. As Dante headed toward the door, Emma called out to him. Mr. Dante, when you come back, will you tell me more stories about when you and Mommy were young? He turned back, seeing the hope in her eyes, the trust she had placed in a man she barely knew. When I come back, Emma, we'll have all the time in the world for stories. The sun was setting as Dante and his men loaded into their vehicles. The warehouse district was only 20 minutes away, but Dante knew that the next few hours would determine the fate of 3 lives that had become inexplicably intertwined with his own destiny. Carlos Vega had no idea that his simple extortion scheme was about to collide with a force that could reshape his entire understanding of power and consequence. The Mafia boss was going to war, not for territory or money, but for something far more precious: the chance to honor a love that had never truly died, and to protect an innocent child who had reminded him of his own capacity for good. Own capacity for good. The drive to the warehouse felt different than any mission Dante had undertaken in decades. Usually, his mind would be calculating angles, planning intimidation tactics, thinking 3 moves ahead like a chess master. Tonight, all he could think about was Emma's small hand clutching his sleeve and Isabella's fevered eyes watching him leave. Marco sat in the passenger seat, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. Boss, the intel shows Vega's got sentries posted at every entrance. Standard setup for a mid-level operation trying to look bigger than it is. How many civilians in the area? Dante asked, his voice carrying a gravity that made his lieutenant glance over in surprise. It's industrial. Should be mostly empty after 6. Why? Dante didn't answer immediately. In the old days, collateral damage was just part of the cost of doing business. Tonight, the thought of any innocent person getting caught in crossfire made his stomach turn. Emma had changed something fundamental in his perspective, reminding him that every bullet fired could shatter someone's world the way hers had been shattered. We do this clean, he said finally. No unnecessary violence. We go in, we have our conversation with Carlos, and we leave. Emma doesn't need more blood on her conscience. The warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete graveyard. Rusty buildings rose against the darkening sky, their broken windows staring down like dead eyes. Dante's convoy pulled to a stop 3 blocks away from their target, engines cutting through the evening silence. Tony, Rico, you take the back entrance, Dante instructed his men. Marco and Vincent with me through the front. Remember, we're here to solve a problem, not create new ones. As they approached the warehouse, Dante could see the amateur nature of Vega's security. Guards smoking cigarettes in plain sight, no proper communication equipment, weapons held carelessly. This wasn't a professional operation. This was a wannabe trying to play in leagues he didn't understand. The front door guard barely had time to reach for his radio before Marco's hand clamped over his mouth. Within seconds, the man was unconscious and zip-tied behind a dumpster. Dante's team moved through the building like ghosts, their years of experience showing in every silent step. Inside the warehouse, they found exactly what Dante expected. Carlos Vega sat behind a makeshift desk, counting stacks of crumpled bills while his crew played cards on overturned crates. The whole operation screamed desperation masked as ambition. Carlos, Dante said, stepping into the light. Every head in the warehouse turned. The card game stopped mid-deal. Someone dropped a beer bottle that shattered against the concrete floor. Carlos Vega, a thin man with nervous eyes and gold teeth, went pale as he recognized the legend standing before him. Dante Marino, Carlos stammered, half rising from his chair. What brings the big man to my humble establishment? Isabella Rodriguez, Dante said simply, and her daughter Emma. Carlos tried to laugh, but it came out as more of a wheeze. That's just business, man. Dead husband's debt transfers to the widow. That's how it works on the street. Not anymore. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Dante's men had positioned themselves strategically around the room, their presence a quiet reminder of the power dynamic at play. "Look, Marino, I got respect for you and all, but this ain't your territory. I'm just collecting what's owed. 50 grand plus interest. The woman can't pay, so the kid covers the debt. Simple economics." Dante took a step closer, and Carlos instinctively backed against the wall. "Let me explain something to you about simple economics, Carlos. That woman you're terrorizing? She raised a daughter brave enough to walk dangerous streets looking for help when her mother was too sick to fight for herself. That little girl has more courage in her pinky finger than you've shown in your entire miserable career. But the debt is forgiven. Completely. Forever." Carlos's eyes darted to his men, calculating odds he couldn't possibly win. "You can't just come in here and—" "I'm not just coming in here," Dante interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "I'm making you an offer you're going to accept. The debt disappears. You and your crew stay away from Isabella and Emma. In exchange, you get to keep running your little operation without interference from people who could shut you down permanently." "And if I refuse?" Dante smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Carlos, do you know what the difference is between a businessman and a thug?" Carlos shook his head mutely. "A businessman understands that some debts aren't worth collecting. A thug just keeps pushing until someone pushes back harder." Dante gestured around the warehouse. "Right now, you get to choose which one you want to be." The silence stretched for long seconds. Carlos looked at his men, saw the fear in their eyes, and made the only rational choice available to him. "The debt's forgiven," he said quickly. "Rodriguez's family is off limits? Permanently?" "Smart man," Dante nodded. "Oh, and Carlos, if I hear about you expanding into neighborhoods where families are trying to raise children in peace, we'll have another conversation. One that won't end with handshakes." As Dante's team prepared to leave, Carlos called out with what remained of his bravado. "This ain't over, Marino. Word gets out that you're going soft, protecting civilians. People are going to start testing you." Dante paused at the warehouse door, considering the threat. Then he turned back with the expression that made Carlos wish he'd kept his mouth shut. "Carlos, let me tell you something about going soft. 20 years ago, I fell in love with a woman who showed me that real strength isn't about how much fear you can inspire. It's about how much good you can do when nobody's watching. Tonight I remembered that lesson, thanks to an 8-year-old girl who was braver in crisis than most grown men." He took a step back into the warehouse, and every person in the room felt the temperature drop. "If you think protecting innocence makes me weak, you're welcome to test that theory. But understand this. A man who fights for money or territory might eventually negotiate. A man who fights for family never stops, never compromises, and never shows mercy to those who threaten what he loves." The drive back to Isabella's house felt like returning from a different lifetime. Dante stared out the window at the passing neighborhoods, seeing them with new eyes. Every house could contain a family struggling against circumstances beyond their control. Every child could be facing the kind of terror that Emma had experienced. "Boss," Marco said carefully, "what you did back there, showing mercy to Vega, the other families are going to hear about it." "Let them hear," Dante replied. "Maybe it's time this business remembered that power without purpose is just organized chaos." When they pulled up to Isabella's house, Dante saw warm light glowing through the windows. His men had kept their promise, maintaining a protective perimeter while mother and daughter waited for his return. Inside, he found Emma sitting beside her mother's bed, reading aloud from a worn storybook. The scene was so peaceful, so normal, that it took his breath away. This was what he'd been fighting to protect. Not territory or profit margins, but moments like this. "Mr. Dante!" Emma jumped up when she saw him, running to wrap her arms around his waist. "You came back. Did you talk to the scary men?" "I did," he said, kneeling to her level. "And they won't be bothering you or your mother ever again." Isabella struggled to sit up, her eyes searching his face for signs of violence or injury. Are you hurt? Did anyone get hurt? Everyone's fine, Bella. It was just a conversation between businessmen. Sometimes that's all it takes. Emma looked up at him with those impossibly wise eyes. Mr. Dante, are you going to stay with us now? Mommy gets scared when it gets dark, and I'm not big enough to protect her yet. The simple request hit him harder than any threat Carlos Vega could have made. Here was a child, asking him to be what he'd never thought possible. Not just a protector, but a presence. A constant source of safety in a world that had shown her too much danger. Emma, he said gently, would you like me to stay? She nodded vigorously. And when Mommy gets better, we can all live together like a real family. Over Emma's head, Dante met Isabella's eyes. They both knew the truth that Emma was still too young to fully understand. Isabella wasn't going to get better. The treatments had stopped working. The doctors had stopped making promises they couldn't keep. But in that moment, Dante made a promise of his own. Not to Isabella, though he owed her more than he could ever repay. Not even to Emma, though she had changed his life with a single desperate plea for help. He made a promise to the man he used to be. Before power and violence had hardened his heart, he promised to remember that strength without compassion was worthless, that protecting innocence was the only victory that truly mattered. Yes, he said quietly, like a real family. As Emma hugged him tighter, Dante realized that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with guns or intimidation. Sometimes they were fought with open hearts and the courage to love people who needed you more than they needed your reputation or your power. The little girl who had asked him to follow her home had led him to something more valuable than any territory he'd ever conquered. She had led him back to his own humanity, and tomorrow, he would begin the complex work of building a life worthy of the trust she had placed in him. She had placed in him. The next morning brought changes that none of them could have anticipated. Dante woke before dawn in the small guest room Isabella had insisted he use, despite his protests that the couch would be fine. Through the thin walls, he could hear Emma's soft breathing and Isabella's occasional cough that reminded him how precious their time together really was. His phone buzzed with messages from his organization. Business didn't stop because he'd discovered something more important than profit margins. But as he scrolled through reports of territory disputes and collection schedules, none of it seemed to matter the way it once had. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Emma peeked around the door, already dressed in a school uniform that had seen better days. Mr. Dante, are you awake? Mommy wants to know if you drink coffee. He smiled, pocketing his phone. Tell your mother I'd love some coffee. And Emma, you can just call me Dante. Okay, Dante, but Mommy says I should call grown-ups Mr. or Miss. It's more polite. The innocence in her correction made his chest tight. Here was a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, yet still clung to the manners her mother had taught her. In the kitchen, Isabella moved slowly but deliberately, preparing breakfast with the careful precision of someone who knew each movement cost her precious energy. She looked up when Dante entered, offering a smile that reminded him powerfully of the young woman he'd fallen in love with decades ago. You don't have to wait on me, Bella, he said gently, taking the coffee pot from her hands. Old habits, she replied, settling into a worn kitchen chair. Miguel always said I showed love through food. Guess some things never change. Emma bounced into the room, backpack slung over her shoulder. Mommy, I made my lunch already. Peanut butter and jelly, just like you taught me. Isabella's face clouded with worry. Baby, are you sure you want to go to school today? After everything that happened yesterday, I have to go, Emma said with startling determination. Mrs. Patterson is teaching us about family trees today, and I want to tell everyone about Dante joining our family. The casual way she included him in her family structure hit Dante like a physical blow. This child had accepted him completely, without reservation or conditions. Emma, Isabella said carefully, we haven't really talked about what happens next. Dante has his own life, his own responsibilities. But he promised, Emma said simply, looking directly at Dante. You promised we'd be like a real family. The weight of that promise settled on Dante's shoulders like a mantle he'd never expected to wear. In his world, promises were contracts written in blood and enforced through fear. This promise was different. This one was written in hope and sealed with the trust of a dying woman and her brave daughter. "I did promise," he said quietly, "and I meant it." After Emma left for school, walking with two of Dante's men discreetly following at a distance, Isabella finally allowed herself to break down. The strong facade she maintained for her daughter crumbled, revealing the terror and exhaustion she'd been hiding. "I'm scared, Dante," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Not of dying. I've made peace with that. But Emma, she's going to be alone, and she's still so young. The foster system, strangers who don't know how special she is." Dante knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "She won't be alone, Bella. I meant what I said last night." "You don't understand what you're signing up for," Isabella protested. "A 8-year-old girl needs more than protection. She needs bedtime stories and help with homework and someone to braid her hair for school pictures. She needs soccer practice and birthday parties and someone who'll teach her about boys when she gets older." Dante looked into Isabella's eyes and saw the same strength that had made him fall in love with her 20 years ago. "Bella, I'll learn. Every day I'll learn something new about being the father Emma deserves." 6 months later, Emma stood at her mother's graveside, holding Dante's scarred hand as they said their final goodbye. Isabella had lived long enough to see her daughter settled into a new life, filled with the love and security she'd always dreamed of providing. "Is Mommy watching us from heaven?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite her tears. "Every single day," Dante replied, kneeling to embrace the little girl who had saved them both. That night, as he tucked Emma into bed in their new home, she looked up at him with those impossibly wise eyes. "Dante, do you think Mommy knew you needed us as much as we needed you?" He smoothed her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I think your mother was the smartest woman I ever knew, sweetheart. She saved us all. Sometimes the most powerful men in the world aren't the ones who rule through fear. Sometimes they're the ones brave enough to let a little girl's courage change everything they thought they knew about strength." Emma didn't just ask Dante to follow her home that day. She led him back to his own heart.